Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been hunting with my grandpa since I was 12 years old. It started when he wanted to teach me responsibility and respect for nature, but over the years it became so much more than that. It's our time together, away from everything else, just the two of us in the woods. My grandpa lost most of his hearing in Vietnam, so he wears hearing aids, but sometimes the silence of the forest is exactly what he needs. We live in a small town where hunting white-tailed deer isn't just a hobby. It's how a lot of families put food on the table. My grandpa taught me everything about tracking, shooting clean, and most importantly, using every part of the animal. Nothing goes to waste in our house. When we bring a deer home, we spend hours together processing the meat. It's hard work, but it's honest work. Our house sits on about 3 acres of fenced property with a long driveway that curves away from the main road. The house is shaped like a T with one wing facing the road and another wing facing the back of our property. We always do our deer processing in the backyard away from the road. Nobody wants to traumatize little kids driving by with their parents. This particular October day had been perfect for hunting. Cool morning, light breeze, and the deer were moving. We'd gotten a nice 8-point buck just after sunrise. When we registered our kill at the check station like the law requires, we headed home to get to work. My grandpa backed his old Jeep up to the big oak tree in our backyard, and we strung up a rope between the tree and our back porch. The deer was hanging there when we started skinning it. My grandpa had taken out his hearing aids because they were bothering him that day, so it was just the quiet sounds of our work. We'd gotten most of the hide off and had draped it over the Jeep's bumper when I heard a voice behind us. A kid, maybe 10 years old, was standing about 15 feet away from us. He sounded amazed and excited when he asked what we were doing, saying it looked really cool. I spun around and saw the boy staring at the deer with wide eyes. Not scared, just fascinated. I tugged on my grandpa's sleeve and pointed. He looked confused until he saw the kid. I gestured for my grandpa to put his hearing aids back in. He fumbled with them for a minute, and by the time he got them working, the kid had wandered off. We figured he'd gone back to wherever he came from and went back to our work. My grandpa made the cut to open up the deer's belly, and that's when all the internal organs started coming out. Right at that moment, we heard this woman's voice from behind us. She was screaming at us, demanding to know what we were doing. We both turned around. There was a woman in her 30s standing there with the same kid from before, plus what looked like her husband and maybe another child. She was pointing at us like we were committing some kind of crime. Then she started yelling about us doing devil chants and told us to shut up. I was so confused. We hadn't been chanting anything. We'd barely been talking. I tried to stay calm and told her this was private property. I explained that she needed to leave right now or we would call the police. She screamed back at me to shut up and said that her kid could be anywhere he wanted. I looked at the kid who was now crying and hiding behind his mother. The poor little guy looked terrified. The woman pointed at her crying son and said, "We have made him upset." My grandpa and I looked at each other. We were on our own property behind our own house, processing a legally harvested deer. This woman had brought her crying child onto our land and was now blaming us for upsetting him. My grandpa had heard enough. He walked over to where he keeps his shotgun and picked it up. I'd seen him handle guns my whole life, but never like this. He lifted it up and pumped it with this dramatic motion, like something out of an action movie. The sound echoed across our property. The woman's face went white. She grabbed her kids and ran back toward the road. Her husband followed. We figured that was the end of it and went back to finishing up with the deer. But about 10 minutes later, we heard a car horn honking. And honking. And honking. I walked around to the front of our property and saw that the woman had driven her minivan right through our open gate and was now parked in our driveway, blocking our vehicles from getting out. She was sitting in the driver's seat, laying on the horn like she was calling for backup. My grandpa came around the corner and saw what was happening. He motioned for me to grab some cinder blocks from the pile we keep for construction projects. I understood immediately what he had in mind. While the woman sat there honking, I quietly placed 4 cinder blocks behind her rear tires and stacked a few more to make sure she couldn't back up. She was so focused on making noise that she didn't notice what I was doing. My grandpa gestured for me to get back to the house while he dealt with the situation. I went up on our back patio where I could see everything but stay out of the way. The whole family was out of the van now. The woman was still screaming about devil worship or some nonsense. Her husband was yelling too, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. The kids were crying. My grandpa walked toward them with his shotgun, not pointing it at anyone, just carrying it. The woman got even more hysterical. She screamed that he couldn't do this and that it was illegal. She kept honking the horn even though she was outside the van now. My grandpa had clearly had enough of the noise. He pointed the shotgun at the ground in front of her van and fired once. The sound was incredible. The woman screamed and jumped back. Her husband started shouting something about calling the police. She ran back to the van and tried to drive away, but of course the cinder blocks stopped her cold. The woman got out again and yelled that we had trapped them and that we were going to pay for what we had done. My grandpa was actually laughing now. The whole situation was so ridiculous that he started laughing. Her husband pulled out his phone and said loudly that he was calling the police. And he did. Within 20 minutes, 2 police officers showed up. The family immediately started telling their story about how we'd attacked them and trapped them on our property. The woman was crying, the kids were still upset, and the husband was demanding we be arrested. But the officers took one look at the situation and understood exactly what had happened. They saw our private property and no trespassing signs. They saw that the family's van was inside our fenced property. They asked to see our hunting licenses and the registration for our deer, which we had. The first officer talked to the family while the second one came over to us. He asked if the family had just driven onto our property uninvited. My grandpa said that was exactly what happened. He explained that we were processing our deer in the backyard, away from the road, and they came onto our land and started harassing us. The officer asked about the warning shot my grandpa had fired. My grandpa told him he'd fired into the ground to get them to stop honking that horn and that this was his property and he had the right to defend it. The officer nodded and went back to talk to his partner. When about 10 more minutes of the family arguing and crying, both officers came back over to us. The officer told us they were going to move those blocks so the family could leave, but they would be citing them for trespassing and harassment. He said we were free to continue with our business. I moved the cinder blocks, and the family drove away without another word. The woman was still crying and the husband looked like he wanted to say something else, but thought better of it. When the police left, my grandpa and I finished processing our deer. We had venison steaks that night for dinner, and every bite tasted like victory. I work as a maintenance guy for a small motel chain in North Phoenix. I've been doing this job for about 3 years now, ever since I got laid off from my construction job. The pay isn't great, but my boss is decent and the work is steady. Most days are pretty routine, fixing air conditioners, unclogging toilets, dealing with the occasional broken door lock. But some days, like this one scorching July afternoon, things get crazy. I was outside the motel around 2 in the afternoon, trying to fix a busted sprinkler head near the front entrance. The temperature was pushing 115 degrees, and I was already soaked in sweat despite having only been out there for 20 minutes. I was just minding my own business when I started hearing this woman yelling at someone near the parking lot. At first, I didn't pay much attention. We get all kinds of drama at the motel. People fighting with their partners, upset about their rooms, complaining about the pool being closed for cleaning. But this sounded different. This woman was really going off on someone. I looked up from my work and saw this middle-aged woman with messy blonde hair screaming at a guy who was backing away from her with his hands up. She was pointing at him and yelling something about him threatening her. The guy looked scared and kept trying to get away from her. Then I heard sirens in the distance getting louder. Someone must have called the cops. Good thing too, because this woman was unhinged. 3 police officers showed up pretty quickly. They got out of their cars and walked over to where the woman was still yelling. I stopped pretending to work on the sprinkler and watched the whole thing unfold. The first officer asked her if she had a firearm since they got a call about someone firing a gun. She denied having a gun or firing anything. Then she turned to the guy who had called the police and told him to stay away from her because he was threatening her. The second officer tried to calm everyone down and figure out what had happened. She insisted that she had proof the man was threatening her and claimed someone else had fired the gun, not her. She kept saying she didn't even have a gun. The officers were being patient with her. They talked to her for almost 10 minutes, trying to get the story straight. They talked to the guy who called them too. Turns out this woman had been staying with a roommate at an apartment complex nearby, but got kicked out after she went crazy and started firing a gun inside the apartment. The third officer asked if she would mind letting them search her bag just to make sure there was nothing dangerous in there. She agreed, saying she had nothing to hide. Big mistake on her part. They found ammunition in her purse along with some small bags of what looked like drugs. Then they ran her name through their system. The first officer told her that she had an outstanding warrant for her arrest and they would have to take her in. She acted shocked and said that was impossible, claiming there was no warrant. The second officer explained that there was a warrant and asked her to turn around and put her hands behind her back. That's when everything went sideways. Instead of cooperating like any normal person would do, she started struggling and trying to pull away from the officer. She yelled at them to get their hands off her and insisted she hadn't done anything wrong. The first officer tried to calm her down, explaining they were just doing their job, but she kept fighting them. Then, out of nowhere, she reached down to her waist and pulled out a handgun. This woman had just lied to the cops about not having a gun, and now she was pointing it at them. Everything happened fast after that. She fired the gun at the officers. I heard the shot and saw them all duck for cover. The bullet went wide and hit the pavement near where I was standing. I dropped my tools and ran behind a concrete pillar. The officers had no choice but to return fire. I heard 2 more shots, and then the woman was on the ground screaming. The whole thing was over in maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. The third officer called for medical help, reporting that shots had been fired. The officers were professional about the whole thing. Even though this woman had just tried to kill them, they started giving her first aid. They put pressure on her wounds and kept talking to her until the paramedics arrived. Even while bleeding on the ground, she kept arguing with them, asking why they shot her and claiming she wasn't doing anything wrong. The first officer explained that she had fired at them first and they had to defend themselves. She was still arguing with them even while bleeding on the ground. The paramedics took her to the hospital, and I figured that was it. A few months later, I was watching the local news when I saw a familiar face. It was the same woman, and she was in trouble again. This time, she had been in custody at the county sheriff's office and was being taken to the medical center for some kind of appointment. The news reporter explained what happened next. This woman had somehow managed to grab an officer's gun while she was in handcuffs, leg shackles, and a belly belt, and fired it outside the hospital. Nobody got hurt. But seriously, how does someone in full restraints manage to do something like that? The news reporter described how the suspect had been able to stand up despite her restraints and attempted to walk away from officers. During the struggle that followed, she grabbed the officer's weapon from his holster and discharged it once outside the medical facility. I looked up more details about the incident online. She had been sitting in a wheelchair when she suddenly stood up and tried to walk away. When the officers tried to stop her, she somehow got her hands on one of their guns and fired a shot into the air before they could wrestle it away from her. Now she is facing aggravated assault charges for both incidents. The woman who lied about having a gun, then pulled a gun on police officers, then somehow got another gun while in full restraints and fired it again. I'm originally from this country but moved abroad for work about 5 years ago. I've been doing pretty well for myself, nothing crazy, but I have a decent job in tech and can afford to travel back home a few times a year. I'm not rich by any means, but I'm comfortable enough to enjoy life without constantly worrying about money. This whole mess started because I was feeling nostalgic. I've been working non-stop for months and finally had some time off, so I decided to visit home and reconnect with old friends. One person I really wanted to see was my old buddy from university. We used to be thick as thieves back then, staying up all night playing video games and helping each other through tough times. But you know how it is, life gets busy, people move away, and before you know it, years have passed without proper contact. I reached out to him through social media and suggested we grab dinner to catch up. Just the two of us, nothing fancy. Just a chance to reminisce about old times and see how life had been treating him. That's when things took an unexpected turn. My friend responded enthusiastically about the dinner idea but asked if he could bring along some people he knew from work. He mentioned there were 3 women and another guy who were really fun to hang out with. I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed. I've been looking forward to some one-on-one time with my old friend, but I didn't want to seem antisocial. Plus, I figured meeting new people could be interesting, so I agreed to his request. He seemed excited and suggested that maybe we could all hang out at my place afterward since he'd heard I was staying in a really nice rental. I'd mentioned to him earlier that I was staying in a pretty decent vacation rental with a great view. I thought it could be fun to have everyone over for drinks after dinner, so I agreed to that plan too. We arranged to meet at this popular restaurant in the city center. It wasn't the most expensive place around, but it wasn't cheap either. The kind of place where you'd expect to spend maybe 60 to 80 euros per person if you ordered reasonably. When I arrived, my friend was already there with his 4 colleagues. The introductions were quick and casual. The 2 women who stayed quiet most of the evening never really spoke their names clearly. The 3rd woman seemed very outgoing and confident, and the guy appeared friendly enough at first. Everything started off well. We found a large table, everyone seemed to be getting along, and the conversation was flowing. That's when I noticed how enthusiastically everyone was ordering. The confident woman ordered the lobster special and asked for an expensive cocktail made with premium vodka. The guy decided on the surf and turf along with some Japanese whiskey. My friend was ordering multiple appetizers to share, and the other 2 women, while quiet, were pointing to some of the pricier items on the menu. Meanwhile, I ordered a simple pasta dish and a beer. I'm not a big spender when it comes to food, and I was honestly more interested in the company than the cuisine. I didn't think much of their ordering at the time. Everyone's an adult, and I assumed they could afford what they were getting. The conversation was actually pretty enjoyable. We talked about work, travel, funny stories from their office. The confident woman was talkative, sharing stories about her weekend trips and showing us photos on her phone. But then the bill came. The waiter placed it in the center of the table, and I could see the total 770 euros. I'd expected maybe 400 to 500 euros for 6 people, but this was significantly more than I'd anticipated. I suggested that we split the bill evenly among all of us, which would come to about 128 euros each. My friend nodded and started reaching for his wallet, but that's when everything went sideways. The guy suddenly told me that he was really sorry but was totally broke and could only contribute 25 euros. I stared at him. This was the same person who just finished a 45 euro steak and had been drinking 15 euro shots all evening. I pointed out that he had ordered over 100 euros worth of food and drinks but could only pay 25. He just shrugged and said money was really tight that month. The 2 quiet women suddenly became very interested in their phones, clearly hoping to avoid the conversation entirely. But the confident woman had a different approach. Karen told me that I should just pay for all of this since I was clearly doing better than the rest of them. I was genuinely confused by the statement and asked her what made her think that. She explained that it was obvious from my Instagram, pointing out that I was always posting photos from different countries and had business content on there too. My Instagram is just normal vacation photos and some posts about the software projects I work on. Nothing extravagant, no luxury cars or designer clothes. I told her those were just normal vacation photos and that I worked in tech, which didn't mean I was rich. She insisted I should be a gentleman and reminded me that I had invited them out. I corrected her, explaining that I had actually invited my friend, and he had asked if he could bring everyone along. I pointed out that at no point had anyone suggested I would be paying for everyone. My friend finally spoke up, but not in the way I'd hoped. He clarified that he wasn't dating any of them and that he just knew them from work. This seemed to make the situation even more awkward. Karen and the guy started talking among themselves about how the bill was too expensive, and not fair. The irony wasn't lost on me, it was perfectly fair when they were ordering the most expensive items on the menu, but suddenly unfair when it came time to pay. Karen complained that the whole situation was ridiculous and that they shouldn't have to pay this much. The guy chimed in saying that if he'd known it would be this expensive, he wouldn't have ordered so much. I reminded them that they knew exactly what they were ordering and how much it cost, since the prices were right there on the menu. The two quiet women were still glued to their phones, occasionally whispering to each other. I could see them frantically typing, probably trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. I'd had enough. The entitlement was overwhelming and I could feel my patience evaporating. I told them that I wasn't splitting the bill evenly anymore and would only pay for exactly what I ordered, which came to 52 euros. I also told them I was going home. This announcement seemed to offend them more than anything else I'd said. Karen protested that I couldn't just leave them there, and the guy said it was really messed up of me. I told them I could and would leave, reminding them that they were all adults who made their own choices about what to order. I stood up, walked to the counter, and found our waiter. I explained that I needed to pay for just my portion of table 12 and told him I'd had the mushroom pasta and 2 beers. The waiter looked a bit confused but calculated my total. I paid, and I could hear heated discussion from our table. When I returned to grab my jacket, the situation had deteriorated further. My friend was asking the group if any of them besides him actually had enough money to cover the bill. The silence that followed was telling. The confident woman was no longer looking so confident. The guy was staring at his phone like it might magically produce money, and the two quiet women looked genuinely panicked. I felt a small pang of guilt watching them squirm, but my frustration with their entitled behavior overshadowed any sympathy I might have felt. I prepared to leave. I decided to make one final point. I walked back to the waiter and handed him a 20 € tip, making sure everyone at the table could see. I thanked him for the great service that night. Here they were, claiming to be broke and unable to pay their fair share, watching me give away money they thought should be going toward their bill. Karen asked if I was seriously tipping right now while they were stuck with the bill. I explained that I was tipping because the service was excellent and I could afford to do so for my own meal. I told her that what they did about their portions was their problem. I walked toward the exit. I could hear my friend trying to negotiate with the others about how to split the remaining 718 euros among 5 people, with most of them claiming they couldn't afford their share. I later found out through social media that they'd had to call other friends and family members to help them come up with the money. The restaurant manager had to get involved, and the whole thing turned into a huge scene that lasted another hour after I left. The aftermath was interesting too. My old friend sent me a message the next day, half apologizing but also suggesting I could have been more understanding. Karen actually had the nerve to send me a friend request on social media, which I promptly declined. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.